Welcome, everyone. I'm Tracy Fitzpatrick, and I'll be your moderator today. Thank you so much for joining us here at Netcom Learning, a market leader in promoting lifelong learning, training, and talent development solutions. We are very excited to host today's event, AWS Discovery Day, AWS Cloud Practitioner Essentials. And presenting today's topic is Terumi. Terumi is an Amazon AAI training consultant and author holding more than 25 years of experience in IT. Her passion for cloud computing developed at a very early age. Being a teenager, she always showed her enthusiasm for understanding the technologies that make computers tick. This deep sense of curiosity on technology led her to achieve all the associate, professional, and specialty certifications and was recognized as an AWS Authorized Instructor Champion. Now, please bear in mind that this is an overview of a very robust topic. We offer a collection of technical and business courses that can be tailored to your specific requirements. If you are interested in a further discussion, you can make an appointment with our learning consultants through our website at netcomlearning.com. Today's session is also being recorded, so you'll get free access to the recording in the next 24 hours via email. Netcom Learning helps customers build innovative learning organizations by achieving a smarter workforce, adapting to change, and driving growth. We do this with a broad catalog of offerings, developing customized learning plans, and our global delivery capabilities. Since 1998, we have been empowering organizations with our managed learning services to help them reach optimal performance results and address challenges. We do have 9 practice areas in which we specialize. They encompass people, process, and technology training. Today's presentation is from the Cloud Practice Area. Netcom Learning offers a comprehensive training portfolio of courses for the topic being covered today. Our upcoming classes include various trainings on the given courses. You can also access a variety of marketing assets, such as the free training and blogs, by clicking on the available event handout. These offerings can be found with a simple search on our website at netcomlearning.com. Today's session is designed to teach business leaders and IT technical professionals the benefits of computing in the AWS Cloud. The session will also cover AWS services for computing, storage, database management, networking, and content. And now I would like to give you a quick overview of the logistics before we get started. To begin with, you do have the option to view in full screen by clicking on the full screen button on the right side of the GoToWebinar viewer. Simply hit the escape key to exit the full screen. Everyone has been muted except for our presenters. Feel free to submit any questions you have for the presenters here in the questions pane, and we will address them at the end of the session. And to get the best out of today's events, we've included the slides, courses we talk about, and marketing assets in the Handouts section of your GoToWebinar viewer. You may refer to them at any time to get a better understanding of today's topic. And we do realize that some of you may have to leave early and want to let you know that as you do leave the session today, you will be presented with a short survey. We would like to request for you to take a quick moment to participate in that survey. Your feedback really helps us understand your learning experience and improve our future sessions for you. The survey answers are measured on a scale of 1 to 5, 5 representing outstanding and 1 representing poor. And now I'd like to pass this over to our trainer to present today's topic. Hey, Terumi, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to AWS Cloud Practitioner Essentials. My name is Terumi, and I'm going to be working with you for the next couple hours or so in introducing you to the cloud practitioner skills that you will need for AWS. All right, let's take a look at the agenda. Today's agenda are broken down into 3 major sections. So module 1, I will be introducing you what the cloud computing is, and specifically what cloud computing is in AWS. Module number 2 is to give you some overview and introduction to some prominent AWS services. Then, last but not least, Module 3 will cover security and compliance services that are available on AWS. And then we'll have a time for us to have a Q&A and a chat at the end. Alrighty, so let's get started. The first module is Introduction to the Cloud and Introduction to AWS. And there are 3 subsections here. I'll first talk about benefits of the cloud computing in general. Then we'll talk about what are some of these components that you have available to you when you are creating systems inside cloud. Then on the last part, we'll talk about something called the deployment models in cloud computing. All right, so let's get started first with the benefit of cloud computing. Okay. Well, first of all, here is a slide that I've come up with some benefits. Now, there are a lot more benefits. In fact, I think I had like 15 that I had to, cut it out. So needless to say, there are a lot of good things about going into the cloud. Now, not to say that, we do have to give a balanced view. There are some minuses as well as like anything else. But today we'll talk about the benefits, okay? And I will go over these 10 in turn. So let's go ahead and get the first one started, which is cost efficiency. All right, so let's talk about cost efficiency. So why do we get efficiency on cost when we move into the cloud? Well, first of all, when you move into the cloud, you're basically taking what you have in your own infrastructure, like let's say your data center, your headquarters, where have you, and you have your own systems in there. You have your servers and you have your network and all that, right? So when you move into the cloud, though, you get rid of all that. That is, you don't need all those physical servers and network. And all you do is what we typically call lift and shift. So you lift out your applications from your servers, okay? And then you shift it right over into the cloud, specifically AWS Cloud. So when you shift it over, your application now goes into the hardware and network that is provided by Amazon Web Services, AWS, right? So that means practically you can get rid of the cost that you've been spending on your physical infrastructure, even data centers. Some customers move into AWS because they're getting rid of their data centers. Now, we'll go over a little bit later on a deployment model. Sure, you can keep some part of your infrastructure and you can mix and match with AWS, but the part that you move into the cloud, you do actually have a cost efficiency. Another one is that most of the time, these costs that you incur on AWS is going to be way cheaper than what you would have paid if you actually implemented yourself. Mainly because AWS is huge. They have so many resources so that they also have the cost advantage, right? So they have massive servers, massive network. So for individually, you get them cheaper compared to if you had gotten them yourself, right? So lower capital expenditures, right? No need to invest on physical servers and such. And also, another great thing about cloud is that you don't actually have to pay for your servers and network until you are using them. So if you decide to use one today, you only pay for one server. If you decide to use 10 tomorrow, you only pay for 10 servers tomorrow, right? Then if you decide to shrink back down into a couple of servers, now you just pay for 2 servers, you see. But if you had most likely prepared it yourself, let's say you say, okay, I think maximum, worst case, we probably need 10 servers. You probably have to buy 10 servers. And when you're using one server out of that, you still have to pay for 10 servers, right? Even though you're only using one. So there you go. That's actually one of the major benefits of cloud computing. And that's one of the major reasons why people do move into the cloud, because in the end, you only pay for what you use and it's cheaper. All right, I think enough said on that one. So let's go ahead. Next one, scalability, right? Scalability, there are actually couple of scaling options. So let me first talk about what scaling is, what's in this slide, and then I'll move into my whiteboard. Oh yeah, I probably didn't tell you, I'm going to be using a whiteboard. Move into the whiteboard and show you what some of these, what these scaling means, right, specifically. All right, so scaling usually means, people say, hey, I need to scale up, I need to scale down, right? You probably heard that. I'm not sure if you've heard the, scaling in and scaling out. I'm not sure you've heard that one, so we'll cover that in a moment. But scaling up and down, that's fine. That means scaling up sounds like, well, we'll have a lot more of something. And scaling down sounds like, well, we have a lot less of something. Well, yeah, so that's the flexibility. If you need more computing power, let's say you need more servers, you get more servers. If you need less servers, you get less servers. Remember, you only pay for what you use. So, you don't want to be prepared for the worst case and kind of stay there, even though you're kind of working under normal situations where you don't need as many servers. So cloud usually means that your resources, such as your servers, your network, the amount of what you use gets automatically adjusted to what you need. So you just get just the right size for what you need. Okay, so that's flexibility, right? And then there are multiple options available in different service models. So we'll talk about the service models and we'll talk about the deployment models later. But there are different types of scalability available to you when you're using the cloud. All right, so I think maybe at this point, I'm going to switch over to my whiteboard and introduce to you two common scaling options. So here we go. Alrighty, so I hope you see my whiteboard. Everything is white, okay? And let me go ahead and put up a couple of servers, right? So let's say that we have a couple of servers, okay? And let's say that these are your front-end web servers, all right? So here we go. All right, so you have two, web servers. So I'll say web servers. And you say, I think our web server, our brand new service, we just need two servers. That's not a problem. But then, of course, to your delight, right? This is a hit. So now you actually getting a lot of customers coming to your website. And then you quickly find out that two servers is just not enough. Right? And if you don't increase the servers right away, your customers are start to get latency, right, on their responses, and some of them may even time out. So what you need is, let's say, I think right now with this amount of volume, we probably need like 5 servers rather than 2. So then you quickly expand, right, the number to, let's say, 5 servers. There you go, right? Then maybe a couple hours later, when the sales is over or something, you don't need 5 servers anymore. You can go back into 2, depending upon the volume of requests that's coming into your servers. So there you go. And would it be nice if this could be done automatically so that you don't actually have to worry about it? So whenever AWS feels that you need more servers, it will add more servers. Whenever it feels that, hey, you probably don't need this many server, they'll get rid of a server or 2. Okay, so this is a type of scaling called the horizontal scaling. And in horizontal scaling, we talk about increasing as scaling out. Then bringing back in as scaling in. Okay, so when you hear scaling out, scaling in, they're talking about horizontal scaling. And normally in horizontal scaling, you set what the minimum number of servers you think you need and what maximum you think you need. And then you're going to be somewhere in reality, somewhere between, let's say, the minimum and the maximum, right? And where you're at right now is called the desired state. So maybe desired is 4, or maybe it's 2, maybe it's 5, right? It just depends, okay? So that's horizontal scaling. And the cloud is great with this. They do this very, very well. Now, there is another type of scaling. So let me go ahead and about that one. So let's say you actually have let's say a database server. So you have the server attached to storage, okay? And this is the database. of something. And let's say you've decided, okay, with the amount of business that we expect to have, we probably need to have, X number of CPU, Y number of RAM, and Z amount of storage. Just fill it in with whatever you think is appropriate, okay? 1 CPU core, 2 CPU cores, whatever, okay? Then, once again, when you open this service up, to your delight, right, this service is a hit. And now your database is too small. It's clunking along. You need something that's more powerful. You need more memory. You need, faster hardware to connect to your database storage, and you need a lot more storage. Okay, so in this case, you're most likely not going to say, well, hey, let's go ahead and add another database or two. That's not how it usually works, right? With the databases, you're not going to get more databases. You're just going to get bigger databases, right? So that means what you're probably going to have is something that is way bigger, right? Many more CPUs, much more RAM. Then you also have, humongous amount of storage, let's say. And there you go, okay? So now you're going to get something that's bigger. So that means, more CPU. Okay, so I'll put a little arrow here and a big arrow back there, right? So you're going to get more CPU, more RAM, more storage. Okay, so this one is, you may have guessed, this is scaling up. Okay, so if you're going in that direction, and then it's always possible that says, oh, you know what, this used to be huge, but now we don't have as many, so we could make it smaller. So you can actually go, go down as well. So this is scaling down. Okay, so this is called vertical scaling. And vertical scaling tends to be a little bit more harder to pull off than the horizontal scaling. But AWS actually does this very well too. So these are two scaling options, right? So I hope now you have better understanding what scaling is all about. All right, let me go back into my slides. Okay, back to my slides. So there you go. So that's scalability, okay? And you have multiple options. The option that I just showed you is actually usually used in something called infrastructure as service. So what you see there, IaaS, right? IaaS under the multiple options, that's usually what you see. Okay. And if you're using something like platform or software as a service, these scaling options are controlled more by AWS, and they'll show up as some options in a service that you're using. Anyhow, so let's move on to the next one. Next benefit, performance. Okay, speed and agility. Well, you know what? So when you move into the cloud, your servers, your network, your databases, whatever, just name a service. Okay. These are supported by not physical servers, but virtual servers and virtual networks and virtual everything, right? So spinning up a virtual server is way faster than trying to set up a physical server. So obviously, you're going to get the speed advantage when you move into the cloud. Now, agility means that, hey, you can quickly adjust to current situation. Well, you know what? You saw an example of that in scaling. As I mentioned, the benefit of the cloud is the scaling that happens automatically. So that means if you have just a little bit of traffic, you get a little bit of servers. When you have a lot more traffic, you get a lot more servers, right? Automatically. So that's agility. Okay, and also, if you have a need to create a system quickly, yeah, there are all kinds of templates and existing patterns of how servers need to be deployed that you can actually use as a script. We're not going to be talking about that too much in this course, but if you were to move forward to something like developers, there's something called infrastructure as code. And infrastructure as code creates servers and networks and databases from a template, which is you can deploy any kind of infrastructure on AWS very quickly using that. It's like a script. So that also adds to agility as well. Okay. Next one here is the global network. And we'll be talking about this global network a little bit later, but AWS has a humongous presence, right, globally. Okay? Right now, I believe they have 31 major presence. So it's not 31 countries. I think it's maybe like, 25, 26 countries. I'm kind of, trying to come off the top of my head here, but they do have global presence. Okay. So that means the network data centers and has reduced latency. So that means let's say you're located somewhere in the United States, let's say East Coast, right? But let's say your customers are in Singapore, in Japan, let's say in Asia, okay? And, these folks from Tokyo trying to access your servers, they have to go across the Pacific Ocean, unless they're going the other direction, they'll go over the Atlantic Ocean, but yeah, Pacific Ocean, right? That's a long haul. And they have to go across the entirety of the United States on the internet, right? So that could produce, unwanted latencies, let's say for streaming videos and stuff like that, right? So wouldn't it be nice that even though you are located in East Coast, right, but your content can be served to your customers in Asia? Wouldn't that be nice? So because AWS actually has all these major presence throughout the world, they do have these locations where you can actually cache your content. Okay, so global network really helps in performance. Next one is reliability. Okay, well, once again, when it comes to this part, we will have a separate section today on this. But right now, let me just say, look, redundancies, okay, in a good way. That means you got, 2 servers, 3 servers to just back up your server. That's a good thing. And AWS actually provides redundancy on many services that you use. And the infrastructure that you will be using on AWS, like the physical data centers and physical networks and physical servers, are highly, highly made available through redundancies, so that if one server, breaks down, you won't probably even notice it because the second server picks up right away. Okay, so AWS actually has mechanisms to, be able to survive through and help you to keep continually running your services on AWS by having all these redundancies set up. And when you have these systems that are highly redundant, that can survive through a lot of these failures and any kind of, let's say security attacks, for example, too, your system in the end is called highly available. Highly available means your system is available for access, even though some parts of the system may be failing. Okay, so that means high availability. Okay, so many providers, including AWS, does provide on a lot of services something called the service level agreement that gives you some idea as to how available. It's kind of like a promise, right? How available their system will be to you. Now, you do have to kind of keep in mind, though, that AWS does have lots and lots of services. So some are designed to be highly available, and some of these systems may not have a specific SLA, but they're all really designed to be highly available. And some services do have SLA, so you may want to check on that when you are using individual services. All right, next one, security. Yeah, so when you are running your own, let's say, data center, or you are managing your own systems yourself, you have to worry about security, right? There's so many incidences of companies losing customer data, their intellectual property, their important information, losing privacy, horrible, right? Because there are a lot more things out there in the cloud, and there are a lot more people who want to get at it, using illicit ways. So you do have to invest a lot on security. So security devices are not cheap, security people are not cheap, and security is a 24/7, 365 days out of a year type of job, right? It never stops. So wouldn't it be nice that you can actually offload that security, work that you would have done to the cloud. Wouldn't that be nice? Now, not everything could be offloaded. There are some responsibility that you will have, which I will cover a little bit later on in the section, so hang on for that. But as a minimum, the infrastructure that AWS provides, like the data centers and the physical servers and the networks and etc., that's protected by AWS. AWS has spent and invested in security, and they really do have a top-notch security services and features. So they protect their networks and their resources. Hence, that means your services that are running on top of those infrastructures are also protected. You know, that part. So investment security, there you go. And also, I'm not sure if you are specifically working with any compliance issues. So for example, I've worked in the past with customers who had to comply with, let's say, with a credit card industry's data security standard, because they use credit card to accept payments and stuff. That's like auditing once a year. Yeah, it's really, it's not an easy thing to prepare for these audits. And, some of you may have a couple of audits or 3 audits, and that's a lot of, compliance, right? Well, just because you put your services in AWS, that doesn't mean you automatically, magically becomes compliant, right? But at least the infrastructure that you're using, the AWS part, is compliant with many, many compliance requirements. And AWS, because they're a global company, they have global certifications on their systems. So, if you want to take a look at exactly which global standards that they are compliant with, that they have passed, they do provide that for you in a service, which I'm actually going to be covering later. So, but just be assured, that is, that AWS do go through auditing, third-party auditing, and they do present you with the evidence that they have complied, right? So that's going to help you a long way in proving that at least the services that you use in AWS are compliant with, let's say, some necessary compliance requirements that you may have. All right, so that's the benefit of the cloud that you don't actually have to do, right? That AWS has, done that for you in a way. All right, next one here is productivity and collaboration. Wow, so your productivity is going to go up. Isn't that always a good thing, right? Collaboration. Okay, so how does that work? Well, when you put things into the cloud, there's a feature of the cloud where your cloud resources, like your servers and your application, should be available through the internet as a minimum, from anywhere, anytime, using any common devices, like your computers and your IoT devices and such, right? That's like anytime, anywhere, okay? So that means that's highly, highly accessible, right, from the internet. As long as you have an internet connection, you have that available. That's productivity for you, right? Because compared to, let's say, oh, I have to be on this special network, I have to be in my company, or I have to use a VPN and all that stuff, that really does kind of weigh down on the time that it takes for you to set yourself up to connect to the internet, well, or not the internet, but your company resources. But when you have it in the cloud, yeah, it's all that, a lot of those things will, you won't need anymore, right? Even though, yeah, you may still use VPNs and such, but it's going to be a lot more faster and a lot more easier, hopefully, to access things in the cloud, okay? Now, I'm telling you all these as a general statement, okay? But sometimes when you want to enhance security, yeah, sure, you could put all those securities on there too. It's up to you. But what I'm saying is that in general, productivity is going to increase. Collaboration tools. AWS actually has several real-time collaboration tools for team members. Now, in a moment, I'm going to show you an environment called Cloud9. Cloud9 is is an IDE, so it's an integrated development environment that AWS offers. Well, it's like if you're familiar with the Microsoft's Visual Studio Code, right? It's a development environment. Well, Cloud9 actually has a team development feature, so you can have multiple people working on a single set of code. That's just one example, right? So there are several collaboration tools available on AWS. So there you go. Now, next one here is automation and maintenance. Now, when it comes to the cloud, right, fast is where you want to be at. And to do everything fast, you want to be lightweight, right? You don't want to be weighed down with physical servers and such. That's why you get into the cloud. But also, you want to be able to repeat your procedures and processes very quickly without having errors. Wouldn't that be nice? So that's automation. So having repeatable processes. So for example, that is huge in the area of development and deployment. You may have heard something called DevOps. Well, DevOps is it's about increasing collaboration between developers and operations people so that the brand new piece of code can be deployed to the end customers as quickly as possible. Okay, and major part of DevOps is automation. And AWS actually has services around automation so that you can really speed up the whole process of developers handing over their new code to the let's say Q&A people, the quality assurance people, so they can test that automatically most of the time. Then once it passes, automatically passes it on to the operations people. And in the extreme circumstances, the deployment of your new code can be also done, be done automatically. So there you go, automation. Also, updating systems, patching systems, and managing your servers can be done automatically as well. So automation is in when it comes to cloud computing. Next one here is sustainability, right? So remember, one of the things that you do usually when you move into the cloud is you either reduce the size of your data centers or you get rid of the data centers altogether and you consolidate right into the AWS data centers, right? So that means you're using an existing data center, you're not creating brand new data centers. What does that mean? Energy efficiency, right? Okay, because you don't have to have extra energy, extra data centers for yourself. You can use the one that's already existing. So you're not adding to the problem, so to speak. Okay. And resource utilization. So because cloud is more of a shared environment, all the AWS customers are sharing AWS's existing servers and networks and databases and such, right? So that means that you are maximizing the usage of existing resources, okay? So you're not wasting by buying a brand new server somewhere. You can always use the server that's already available in the cloud. There you go, okay? It's great for sustainability all the way around. Innovation. Now, this one might be a little hard for you to kind of grab hold of. Like initially, when people told me, yeah, you go into the cloud and you could do more innovation, I said, well, how is that true? Okay. Well, it's because remember how you don't have to buy physical servers when you are, let's say bringing up a service. All you have to do is just request a server and you get a virtual server. And if you need two, you just say, hey, I need another one, and it'll come up for you. And when you don't need it, you can shut it down and you don't have to pay for them. So that means if you want to do something new, if you want to create a brand new system just as a test, like a prototype, you'll be able to do that in a very cost-effective manner and very quickly. You don't have to ask your procurement department, hey, can you buy me a couple of servers? And you have to kind of wait for the approvals to go through and for it to be ordered and for it to be delivered. You don't have to do all that, right? You just go into just access AWS and go click, click, click. And yeah, you're going to have your server right there. And then when you're done, you can just go ahead and shut it down and you won't be charged for it. So it's a lot more easier as a process for someone to try something new, just to try it out. And AWS actually has something called a free tier. So on some services, you can use them for free for some period of time. So, if you take advantage of that, it's practically free to try something new, and that will fuel your innovation and experimentation. Okay, and I'm not sure if you've looked at any other of my webinars, but I do machine learning as well. And just think about machine learning. Like, what does it take to do machine learning? And Well, what it takes is very powerful computers and systems and lots of resources, and they're called algorithms and models and all that stuff. And if you're trying to do that yourself, yeah, it may be pretty cost prohibitive. Okay. But on AWS, these things can be done just like what I just mentioned. Start small and maybe somewhere around the free tier or something very, very nominal. Then once you know that that's exactly what you want and that's what you want for your business, then you can just go ahead and scale that, scale that out or scale that up, whichever scaling you do, and make it production grade. Then, hopefully by the time you have this big implementation, you'll have incoming revenues from that service too. So you should be able to pay that, for those services. But what I'm saying is that initially though, before, when you had something like cloud, where all these things were pretty, cheaply available, before you probably had to be in some kind of a big company or maybe in a university or, those places where you're in the right place to have access to those right resources. But if you're not in the right place, you don't have those resources, you won't be able to innovate. You see? And this is actually called democratization of technology, because all these high technology that used to be prohibitive for usage for regular folks like myself, now they're all available to you for you to check it out. So there you go, right? Innovation is a huge, huge part of the benefit of the cloud computing. And last but not least, let's talk about disasters, right? Okay. So as I am talking to you right now, there was actually a major disaster that happened like yesterday, pretty close to where I live. So I live in Hawaii, and there's an island in Hawaii called Maui. Well, Maui had this major, like a wildfire disaster where I think like 100 homes were burnt to the ground, and a very, very, prestigious historical area was like burnt down. Okay, so I heard over the radio that these businesses, everything is gone. Okay, well, imagine something like that happening. It says, okay, I had a data center there. Of course, Maui doesn't have a data center, but just pretend. Yeah, we had a data center there, and you know what? It just like burned down to the ground. Okay, so were you prepared? Did you have another data center that, that just in case that you knew that something like this was going to happen? And you say, wait, are you kidding? We've never had that kind of fire in Maui. That location has existed for hundreds of years. Okay, so no, we don't have a backup for that. And imagine having an entire data center backed up. That's a lot of cost. And if you're a small business, that's going to be kind of a lot of cost that you probably don't have. Okay, well, that's going to be a total different story if you are in the cloud computing. Because as I mentioned, right, AWS actually has like 31 major presence where they have a bunch of data centers on each of those 31 locations. And you can take advantage of them. And you say, okay, so, I'll have the data center that I'm going to be using, let's say in, West Coast. But I'll have a backup just in case in East Coast, or maybe even in, let's say, Asia, right? So any place you choose, as long as, from your company's policy that you can move your data outside, let's say, the United States, you got to be careful with that, okay? So although these locations are available globally, you have to be mindful of what your company's policies are about taking your data outside from, let's say from the US, if you're a US company, or if you are, let's say, I have a lot of customers that's in Japan, and, they have some strong policies about not taking Japanese customer data outside of Japan, right? So, but, putting those things aside, from technology perspective, yeah, you could use almost any one of those other presence that they have, AWS has, and make your backup there. And you can have your backup not active, so you don't have to pay for it. But when something does happen, you could just bring it up, right? So in a matter of minutes, you'll have your business back and running using a data center that is undamaged. You see, unfortunate things do happen, things do break, but you want to have your system available nonetheless. And disaster recovery, you're going to have much more options with a very cost-effective options on top of that. So there you go. So these are the benefits of the cloud that I've actually kind of came up for you, just to because I've actually went through those, one at a time. Let's take a look at it as a summary, right? Cost efficiency, kind of imagine why I said that. Scalability, remember horizontal and vertical. Performance, right? Scaling is part of that performance too. Reliability, because AWS is huge, right? It has huge presence. Security, remember how much security costs, and AWS does a lot of that. Productivity and collaboration, teamwork, right? And also you can access these resources very quickly. Automation and maintenance, remember cloud, it's all about automation. Sustainability, sure, you're not wasting resources, we're sharing resources. Innovation, democratization of technology, and last but not least, disaster recovery. Okay, so there you go. I hope now you have some ideas as to if somebody says, hey, why would you ever want to move into the cloud? And said, oh, let me give you a list, right, of all these things, and I have more. All right, so let's go on to the next subject, shall we? So we're still in module 1. Now let's talk about understanding various cloud computing components. Okay, so that's a pretty generic statement, okay? And I could take this, many ways, but I'm going to take it to the most standard way, standard cloud computing components. And you know what? I'm actually going to show you a demo, okay, on how all these things come together. So let's go and take a look at this slide that I have, right? Understanding various cloud computing components. I'm just going to introduce to you the basic, the absolute basic components that you will get from AWS. And then there's like tons more that on top of that. But a lot of us actually start with these 3, compute, storage, and network. Okay, so let me show you what that looks like pictorially on my whiteboard. Then I'm going to show you how that works in actual AWS. All right, so here we go. All right, so let me go ahead and get back into the whiteboard. I hope you see the whiteboard. All right, so remember that was vertical scaling. Remember that was horizontal scaling. There you go. All right, so now here we go. So now we're talking about resources, okay? So when you're thinking about, let's say, a server, okay? You know what? Let me actually not use that picture. So let's see. I'll use this one. But let's say you're thinking about, have a desktop computer. There you go. So here's my rendition of a desktop computer. Here's a screen. Okay, and here's a keyboard. And there you are. There you go. Okay. So when you're thinking about that, thing, the IT computer, right? What are the components here? Okay. If we were to break this down into multiple components, what would that be? Okay. Well, one, so I'm going to use a cloud lingo here. Okay. So one is called the compute. So that's one component. Okay. So you may say, well, what in the world is a compute? Okay. Is that a computer? No. Compute is a component of this, like a server. Okay. But it consists of CPU. It also consists of RAM, random access memory. And it usually refers to any special type of hardware that you may have, right? So I'll put specialized hardware. So these specialized hardware, not going into too deep into the weeds here, you can have things like compute optimized, memory optimized, network optimized, right? So these are special type of hardware that actually speeds up certain parts of the processing of data. That's exactly what compute is. Compute, like computation, is processing of your data, right? Stuff that you need to process. So yeah, you need a CPU, you need a RAM, and you probably need some of these hardware. But what else is there in this computer? What other components? Well, gosh, even if you can process something, you probably need to install your operating system. You think maybe? Okay. How about saving data? Okay. So what you need is storage. right? Kind of makes sense, right? And this laptop or whatever usually has storage already, built inside it. Okay, but some systems have storage connected, via some kind of very fast fiber network and so that. So there are different types of storages. So let me kind of make a list of some storage that's actually available through AWS. So one type of very, very common storage is called the block storage. So block storage is sometimes referred to as a volume storage. And that's the kind of storage that you would use if you wanted to install an operating system or store data, let's say, in a database. That's the kind of storage that you use, right? It's called the block storage. So hard disk drive, solid state drive, that's the kind of stuff that I'm referring to, okay? But then if you just want to kind of upload a humongous file so that you can have somebody else download it, that's usually called the object storage. Okay, and AWS actually has something called S3 that you may have heard of, but it's about uploading files and downloading files. You can't really install anything, but it's for storage. The next one is called, file share. So let me kind of write that down, file share. So this is like having a shared folder on the network. And let's say you have some Excel sheets in there and you have 10 people that have to update this Excel sheet, at the same time and stuff, collaboration, right? So that's called file sharing. So you may be familiar with some, protocols such as network file service like NFS. If you share files using, let's say, Microsoft's Active Directory, it's called the SMB. Server message block. So these are protocols that are used for file sharing, and it's also available on AWS. The last one that I'm going to put in here is cache. So cache is, you may say, hey, I need to cache that. I need to cache that file. I was going to say, I need to cache that check, but no, I need to cache that file, right? So cache is a in-memory storage. So it's not, any kind of disk. It's in memory, so it's super fast. Okay, and it's usually used for caching database replies, caching streaming media, etc. So that's caching, but it's storage too. So there you go. So you have storage, right? So that's another component. And the final component is, even though I didn't put it here, you probably have this computer kind of connected to a network. And that's probably connected to, like the internet and stuff, right? So you need to have network. So network is the final component, right? Final major component. So I'm going to put in here for your network, folks, right? So here is a picture of a router, right? So you need to have a router or switches, network, actual network, so that all these things come together. Now you have a computer that's connected to the network. And these are don't you think, absolutely the minimum thing that you would expect to have in the cloud. Now, you can have databases, you can have other services, but this is pretty basic stuff, right? So that's why, let me go back into the slides for just a moment, is that basic components are compute, storage, and network, right? So now let me switch into AWS and show you how all these components come together, okay, to create a virtual machine. Right? Virtual machine is just a server inside AWS. All right, so I'm going to switch the screen to my demonstration screen. Here we go. Okay, so I hope you are seeing my demonstration screen. So this is the AWS screen, okay? So right now I'm going to log in to my account and I'm going to show you how I create a virtual machine. Now the virtual machine is going to have these three parts, right? So part one, compute, part two, storage, and part three, network. So I'll point them out as I create my virtual machine. So let me first log in, right, into my account. Okay, so I'm in my typical screen for AWS. Now, to create a virtual machine, I first need to create a network. Remember, that was one of the components. So the network service is called the VPC, Virtual Private Cloud. So I hope you see my cursor pointing to the VPC. And by the way, I'm actually in North Virginia data center right now. So that's on the East Coast. That's a pretty popular data center to be in. And then I'm going to click on the VPC. So I'm going to create right now something called a default VPC, where I'm going to put my virtual machine on. So here we go. I'm going to call the VPC and actions, create a default VPC, and I'll say, yeah, create the default VPC. Okay, so there you go, voila, right? So there's my network. Okay, and so to show you this one now, there is a default VPC. So I'm just going to say default VPC. There you go. So that's a network. Isn't that great? That was pretty fast, right? So the next part then is the compute and the storage part. So let me go into a service called EC2, Elastic Compute Cloud. And there's EC2. So I'm going to go to EC2. Now I'm going to show you how I quickly bring up a server. So here, I'm just going to click on, say, launch instance. So instance means a virtual machine, launch instance. And I'll say my demo server, whatever, right? And then I'll choose my operating system. I'll stay with the default, okay? Amazon Linux 2. And the actual instance type. So this is where I decide how many CPUs, how much memory, right? So I'm going to pick a very small one here. It's a 1 virtual CPU and 1 gig of memory. Okay, so there you go, right? So that's the compute part. Then I'm just gonna, this part right here, I'm just gonna go with the default. So the network setting is, this will select the network that I just created, okay? Because there's actually only one network. So notice where it says default VPC. So that is the VPC that I just created. So I think we're good to go. And let's say launch instances. Here we go. And this will take maybe, I don't know, maybe 30 seconds. So let's take a look at the view all instances here. So you'll now see my demo server attempting to come up, right? Right now it says instance state is pending. Well, because the virtual machine has to be created, the operating system has to be installed. By the way, while we're waiting for this, right, there was one part that you probably didn't see, okay, which is, hey, what happened to storage? Okay, well, storage was actually, there was a default storage setting there, okay, but there is a storage. If I go to the storage tab, AWS actually did allocate a volume storage, right? So that's block storage. It's called EBS, Elastic Block Store. So yeah, that's there too. So now I've just actually created for you a virtual machine with the compute and storage and the network, okay? So right now, let's see if this machine is running. Let's see the general, let me go back to the general tab. And it looks like the tests were okay. Let's see, I think. So let's see here. Let me go back to the instances. Let me take a look at the instance. Status check. I think it's still, yeah, it's still initializing. So this usually takes maybe like a minute. It just depends on, how big the operating system is. This one is not that big. I'm not doing anything special. So it should come up in a moment. And let's go ahead and kind of hang in here, okay? And when it comes up, I'll show you that it's actually is working, okay? So let's see here. Initializing. Right? I'm not sure if you've ever tried to install create a server on physical server. It takes, for me at least, it takes me like half a day. Maybe that's too long. But here, it'll only probably take like a minute, right? Remember the efficiency, productivity, right? Yeah, all that's true here. So I don't mind the initialization. When this is done, the server will come up. All right. Let's see. Okay, so now status check says 202 checks passed. That means the hardware is okay, the server's okay, and let's see if we can actually log into the server. So here, I'll just say connect, and let's see if we can actually connect. Crossing my fingers, connect. Okay, so there you go. So now I'm connected, okay? So that is the actual server. All right, so I hope you're convinced. So this is the basic components, and I was able to show you what that looks like when everything comes together. Okay, so let me go ahead and flip back to my my slides. All right, so I'm going to switch the display. Here we go. Okay, so I hope now you are seeing my slides. So this is what we just talked about. So let's go on the next part of the agenda. So this is the third part of Module 1, which is cloud computing deployment models. Okay, now we kind of touched sort of a little bit on the earlier slide. I didn't really want to go in there at that time, but now we actually have the chance to talk about what this deployment model is all about. Okay, so remember it's a model, right? It's not going to be exactly the same, you know, when you actually set up your system in a cloud. But the deployment model means that it's how the cloud services are hosted. Okay, because all these services kind of lives inside actual server somewhere, right? So how are they hosted and who has access to them? Okay, now the picture that you see on the left, this is called the NIST cloud computing model. NIST is a US government organization that creates standards for IT, for governments and things, and for the military, DoD, Department of Defense. And this is used quite a lot, not just by the Americans, but by international folks as well. And so this model, just so that I'm not going to go through this model right now. I'm just kind of talk about the last piece where I have this orange box around. But when you have a chance, take a look at it because this, I believe, is a very nice, concise model of cloud computing in general. Okay, but anyway, I'm just going to grab hold of this last part of this bottom piece that says deployment models, right? Remember, this is how cloud services are hosted and determines who has access to them. Okay, so here we go. The deployment models, there are 4 types: public cloud, the private cloud, the hybrid cloud, and the community cloud. Okay, now I do have slides on each and every one of them, right? But rather than kind of showing you these slides, I do want to kind of show you my whiteboard as how I usually explain these. Okay, so here we go. Right, which may not be how how you may see on other slides elsewhere. So if you think about cloud, remember I told you that everything is shared, right? So let's say that there is a physical server in AWS. Okay, so this is a physical server. Now, your virtual machine, that server that I just made? That's a virtual machine, okay? Well, virtual machine is not real, right? It's virtual, okay? But it is running inside a real server, okay? So let's say that virtual machine that I just created is right here, right? So this is my virtual machine. It's running there. But you know what? This physical server actually have other people's server there too, right? So you may have a bunch of other folks. So maybe there's like, another server and another server, right? Like, okay, So I know the green one's mine, okay? But who's this? And who's that is running inside the same physical server, okay? Well, AWS is a public cloud vendor, right? So it provides public cloud. Public cloud means that we share AWS resources with the public, right? With anybody. So you have no idea who that is. You have no idea who that is. But the way AWS sets it up is that, but it's okay though, because we protect your server. You won't even notice that there are other people in the physical server. But if you kind of stand back and look at it, the reality is that you are sharing resources like physical server and physical network and stuff like that, right? So I say this is a physical network. You're sharing with some bodies that you don't know, okay? But there are, of course, AWS customers. That's basically what a public cloud is, okay? So you're sharing with the public. That means anybody, who has accounts in AWS, right? Possibly, okay? So that there are some options though, but I'm just kind of really making a generalization here, okay? There are options where you don't have to share the hardware, but it's really, really expensive. But in general, people do share hardware, and you share with people, other AWS customers. So here I'll just put other AWS customers. Okay, so that's a public cloud. So what does a private cloud look like? Well, let's see. Let me just copy this thing right here. We'll have a same situation, but we'll make a copy. Hang on here. Let me kind of move over to that side. Okay, so now this one is going to be an example of a private cloud. So here we are. Let's just erase that. Private cloud. So you still have a physical server, you still have a virtual machine, and you still have people that you are sharing with, because it's cloud, whether it's public or private, okay? But the question is, who are those folks that's right next to you? Well, it's not going to be anybody, right? It's going to be somebody from your company. Or your organization, whichever. Okay, so that means it's somebody that you know where they're coming from, right? It's somebody in your company. Now you don't know who they are because everything is automatic, things are allocated dynamically, all that, but you still know that you have this warm and fuzzy feeling that, oh, but this physical server is shared with somebody else that's in my same company. Okay, now, does that mean that you could say, phew, I don't have to worry about anything now, security is no problem because I trust these people? You can't go quite that far, right? Because even if you're sharing this physical server with somebody that you know, true, a company would have a standard on how you would use the cloud. So, there'll be a shared understanding about, how you should use the cloud. So, you could feel assured, hopefully, that whoever you're sharing with is playing by the rules, they're playing nice, and that, you don't actually have to worry too much, right, about people going like off the rails, right? But, still bad things can still happen, right? So you could still have like, let's say a virus, kind of infiltrating the server. There you go. That's my rendition of a virus. Okay. And then, kind of spreading across. I mean, these things do happen, right? So you're not getting rid of all the risk of the cloud, but, you do kind of feel a little bit more trusting in a private cloud. Okay. Now, AWS is not a private cloud service. So when you're talking about private cloud, it's usually something that you would buy your hardware and implement inside your data center, or there may be some vendors that will actually give you an environment where only you and your company will use, right? So that's a private cloud. So what in the world is a hybrid cloud, right? So the hybrid cloud, let me actually get a copy of my public cloud here. Let me just get a copy of this one more time. Here we go. And copy that over. Move that over to the right. And then let me move this thing down a little bit. Okay. Here we go. Oh, I moved it down too far. All right, so hang on. Let me bring that thing up. Just a moment. Let's see here. Okay, the physical server part got left behind, but that's okay. All right, so hybrid cloud then is that when you have connectivity, that is integration between the private cloud and the public cloud. There you go. So that is a hybrid cloud. That kind of makes sense, right? Now, in the AWS world, this, and also if you have, let's say, your data center, which may or may not be cloud enabled. Let's say this is your, what we usually like to call on-premises. Okay, so you can actually put that in the mix too. There you go. So that is your hybrid cloud. Okay, now obviously you can have, let's say, on-premises connected directly to your, let's say, AWS network. You can have that too. Let me see, let me connect that on the network. Here we go, like that too. Yeah, that works as well. And there you go. So that's a hybrid cloud. Last but not least, community cloud. So the community cloud, you know how you have your private cloud and your neighbors are somebody from your company? Well, with the community cloud, your neighbors inside that physical sharing thing is not from your company. It's not from regular, let's say AWS account users, but it's actually member of maybe some interest group or same industry. Okay, so it's like a industry cloud or interest group cloud, where people of like minds and like needs and people that need common tools in the cloud come together and create a cloud. So it's a little bit more trustworthy than the public cloud, but not as trustworthy as a private cloud. It's like right in the middle, right? Because it's somebody that you don't know, but you just know that they're from your same industry, like, healthcare industry, automotive industry, stuff like that. So that's basically what a community cloud is. Okay, so let me go back into my slides. Alrighty then, so now you actually have a picture of how I usually describe what the deployment models are. Let's take a look at the actual description of each, right? So these slides, hopefully you have access to them after this webinar, so you can go back and take a read at it. But I have the definition on each and every one of them, right? So I'm not going to go over the definition, but the access here is available to the general public or large industry groups, so that's public cloud. Okay, it's cost effective. That's why AWS as a public cloud is a very cost effective solution. Scalable, no maintenance required by the user, great, but potential less control over and security, since you're sharing this resources with anybody who has account on AWS usually. The private cloud, you have greater control for security because look, it's customized cloud solution just for your company, right? But the con is it's going to be more costly because chances are you have to set these things up yourself. So you're not going to be able to get rid of, most likely, the data center, although there are some options that will allow you to get rid of the data center at the same time. But still, private one is going to be a little bit more costly than the public. Then you have the hybrid cloud. So now you have the best of both worlds, public and private, and you have the worst of both worlds, right? You have the pros and cons of both, right? And in addition to that, see the cons versus complexity in managing and integrating different environments. Like connecting public and connecting private is not like plugging something into a hub or switch. It's not like that. It takes a little bit more effort. It likes more technology. Things can go wrong. So there's additional complexity. And when you add complexity to anything, that really, creates an environment for additional vulnerabilities, right? Things going wrong, harder to, troubleshoot, all that. So it's a good thing and it's a bad thing at the same time, okay? And finally, community cloud. As I say, it's cost effective compared to private, but still it does cater, customized to a specific interest groups, specific community needs. But the cons are, you can't customize as much compared to the private cloud, and compared to the public cloud, you still have risk of not knowing exactly who you're sharing your resources with. There you go. So that is the end of module 1. So you know what? Let's go ahead and take a little bit of short break. Thank you.
We are now going to take a 5-minute break, but before we do that, we are going to launch a quick poll that we want to invite you to participate in. Doing so helps us know how we can better serve you by telling us who might be interested in more information or in taking some additional training. In addition, we have a lot more informative webinars coming up, so please go to netcomlearning.com/webinars in order to register.
All right, welcome back, everyone. All right, so now let's go into Module 2, Overview of AWS Services. Okay, now AWS has tons of services, hundreds of services. So obviously, we don't have enough time to do all those, but what I'm going to do is we're going to go into the first part of Module 2, where I will introduce to you some big chunks of categories of service domains, okay? Then I'll show you how one will access these services in general. So here we go. So first one here, service domain. Now, like I said, I just took a big chunk, right, of these service domains, and I have 10 of these. Now, once again, rather than going through and reading, because you can read this as well as I can, let me show you what the services look like. So I'm going to now switch over to my AWS Management Console screen. So I'm going to switch the screen right now. Just a moment. Okay, so I hope you are now seeing my AWS screen. Okay, so this is just like before. I logged into AWS, right? So this is typically what it looks like. Okay, now the service domains. You can see all the services in AWS by selecting the menu on the top left-hand side, right next to the AWS smiley face that says services. So if I were to click on services, you see not the recently visited, but the one that says all services. You see there's analytics services, application integration services, cost management services, blockchain services, etc., etc. These are the domains. Okay. Now, once again, go in there and take a look at it. There's so many things like robotics. Doesn't that sound interesting? Satellites, I wonder what those things are. I've actually not done them. Now, the one that I usually use is storage, security, network, machine learning, developer tools, database, compute, containers, blockchain. Yeah, so those are the services that I usually use, right? So these are the domains. So let's take, for example, remember I created the virtual machine, okay? That actually crossed two domains. One is the virtual machine domain, and the other one is the compute domain, right? So if I were to go to here, as I'll say the networking and content delivery, see that right there, okay? That menu. If I were to click on that, you'll get on the right all the various services that kind of belongs there. And the one that I used was VPC, remember that? I went to VPC and I created the network. Now, on top of that, I use the compute domain services. So if I do compute, see all these things? You see app runner, batch, oh, EC2. So that's the one that I used, okay? Now, if you want to do something else like Beanstalk, Lambda is a serverless compute service, etc., etc. Okay, so like I said, if you go through this thing, if I say all services, there you go, A through Z. Okay, hundreds of services, and don't let this really fool you, because even the compute service like EC2 actually have sub-services inside. So I'm just going to just show you the EC2 service and how you look and see what's available. Let me just click on the EC2 for you. Okay. Well, here's the EC2. You saw that earlier in the the presentation, but kind of pay attention to what's on the left-hand side. What's that? Okay, well, this is the submenu or sub-services within EC2. So there's the instances service, images service, Elastic Block Store service, which is the storage service, and then you have network security service, load balancers, automatic scaling. Those things are legitimately separate services. So there's a domain, and then there are services within the domain, and there are sub-services within the actual services. There you go, okay? So those are the AWS service domains. Alrighty, so let me go back into the presentation slides. I'm going to switch right now. Hang on. All right, so I'm back on my slides. So there you go. That's the one that I chose for you. I have the compute, storage, and network. Remember, those are the critical, foundational services that I mentioned. Databases, yeah, arguably, I think that's pretty important too. Like I said, I picked the one that I use, developer tools, security, identity, and such, right? So these are the service domains. So check it out. take some time to look at something that you've never seen before and see what you could discover. Remember, democratization of technology, give it a try. All right, so that's the AWS service domains. Let's move on to the next topic, which is how to access AWS services. Well, yeah, right. Accessing these services are pretty important, and you've already seen one way of accessing it. I've accessed it through the browser, right? So let me actually show you how many ways you have to access AWS services, and I'll show you a quick demonstration on how these things work. Okay, so here we go. Let me move on to my whiteboard. Yay! Remember, this is what we just used. That was the hybrid. Okay, so you have AWS. Yes, right? So here we go. Here's AWS. And you want to access them. Okay, so here we go. You have AWS. So fundamentally, you have 3 ways that you can access AWS services. So one way, step number 1, is called the Management Console. So that is the web browser access that I use. So there you go. There's a web browser. Okay, Management Console, and you access it by clicking through the screen. The next way is called the AWS CLI. So CLI stands for Command Line Interface, right? So that's like a little terminal. Okay, so this way it's not as user friendly, but you can start to automate your commands. Put your bunch of AWS CLI commands into one, like a file, like a script file, and run them all together. So there you go. You can start doing automation that way. You could do the same thing that you could do on Management Console using AWS CLI. It's just that it's not as user friendly. Okay. And then the third and the last way, the common way of accessing it, is called the SDK. So that is a software developer kit. So that's like, Python or something, okay? And you could do, once again, automation, programming, right? So these are the 3 common ways of accessing AWS. So let me show you just quickly how these things, what it looks like and what it does, right? So here we go. I'm going to switch the screen over back into my AWS screen. So I'm going to switch right now. Okay, so I hope now you are seeing my screen. Okay. Now, the screen that you're seeing right now, this is the example of a management console, right? So when you log in, this is what you get. And prior to the webinar, I've actually created some things. I created something called the S3 buckets. So here, if I go to S3 buckets right here. So these are object storage. And I created 2 buckets, right? Netcom demo bucket 1 and Netcom bucket demo bucket 2. Okay, so now I'm going to go into, so you see how I kind of clicked through and went to S3 using the Management Console. So this is the way I would look at what buckets do I have, right? Using the Management Console by selecting the service and clicking through it. That's it, right? But it's hardly automation, right? This is a human interface, okay? It's a manual process, right? Now let's go into the other 2 methods where automation is possible. Now, prior to the workshop, just to kind of save time, I've created this thing called Cloud9. Remember, I kind of mentioned Cloud9? It's an IDE, Integrated Development Environment. Okay, so it's a very nice environment where you can create programs, you can run CLI commands, and that's what I'm going to show you right now. So here is a terminal, okay? And this is where I can run the AWS CLI commands. So if I have to say, hey, AWS, okay, version, it's going to tell me what CLI version I have. Well, it seems like I have an older version. Right now, there's a version 1 and version 2. But for this demonstration, it doesn't matter. Now, I'm going to type a command, AWS S3 LS. Now, that says, hey, I'm running an AWS CLI command, and the service that I want to use is S3, and please make a list of all the buckets. Great. So if I were to return, it says, oh, look, netcom demo bucket 1, netcom demo bucket 2. Okay, so I did the same thing that I did by clicking through just by typing that, very short one-liner. So that's how you would access using the CLI command, right? So anything you can do on the management console, you can do using AWS CLI commands. And finally, I'm going to show you how I do the same thing using a Python SDK. So here, I've actually written a very simple program. Yes, it's a very simple program, right? Using Python. Now, Boto3 is a Python library for AWS. Then, what I did was I created S3 client. I need that to access the S3 service. And then I just wrote a very simple loop to list all the existing buckets. Great. Now I'm just going to run this thing, right? So here, let me clear the screen. Okay. Make sure I have that program. Yep. So I'll say Python. I'll say lists 3py. So I'm going to run this. Now I'm going to get a little warning because the Python version that's installed is not the latest, greatest version. So it's going to give me a warning that says, hey, you may want to kind of upgrade the Python, but just ignore that. We're going to look at the last 2 lines of this output. So here we go. I'll say, go ahead and run it. And like I told you, right, there's this big old long warning. But if you look at the last 3 lines, it says, hey, existing buckets, netcom demo bucket 1, netcom demo bucket 2. There you go. So those are 3 distinct ways that you can access AWS. Great. Now I'm going to go back into my slides. Switch screens right now. Okay, so I hope now you are back, right, into the screen. So how to access AWS services. And, as I displayed for you, one is a management console way. The other is AWS command line interface way, and the other is the software developer kits way. Now, for the software developer, I showed you the example using Python. Now, I believe there's around 5 or 6 other languages, such as Java, .NET, and others. I think Golang is in there too, that you can use for software development kit. So there you go, okay? Choose whatever fits your needs, okay? Obviously, software developer kit is the one that you can create more complex application solutions to access AWS solutions, automatically or from some application. Alrighty, so now we're ready to move on to the 3rd module. Here, we're going to be covering 3 things. Overview of security as in AWS security. We'll cover shared responsibility model. Shared responsibility was something that was kind of sort of mentioned earlier. Now we're going to go into it with the explanation. And AWS security services and compliance services that you can, check it out. Right. So first, let's go into the overview of security. Okay. Now, we're not going to go into the security in general. We're going to go right into specifically in AWS. So here we go. Right. Now, I have here security, CIA. That's the only generic security that I'm going to talk about. CIA stands for confidentiality, integrity, availability. So in the security world, when you ask, hey, what do you do in security? You say, well, I protect the confidentiality of the data, integrity of the system, availability of the solution, whatever, right? So confidentiality means, you have a proper control over access of who access what sensitive information, right? Who does not have access. Integrity means you make sure that nobody can come, in some weird manner and try to tamper with your data, okay? Availability is, I've kind of talked about availability when we're talking about scaling, but you want to make sure that nobody can stop your services from being accessed, right? So that means denial of service is the thing that happens when you can't do that, and you want to make sure that your services are accessible. So these are CIA, that's security, okay? Now in AWS, what type of CIA can you do with these services? So I'm just going to go quickly through some of these, but I will specifically spend just one, I'll do a whiteboard on one of them, okay? Now, infrastructure security. So infrastructure security is obviously, it's where you have servers and networks and you want to protect those, okay? And AWS actually has many services that will protect your infrastructure. And if we're talking about the infrastructure as a network, that kind of overlap with item number 3, which is network security. So infrastructure security is pretty generic. But if we're talking about something like AWS's infrastructure, well, it has global presence, it has many, many redundancies, and that in itself is part of security. And of course, AWS does its part in protecting itself from hackers and bad things happening. Now, I do want to talk about identity and access management. All the rest, it's pretty generic stuff, right? It's in general what you would expect from companies like AWS that would provide you with these services like encryption, right? Threat detection, monitoring, all those great stuff, the security. Yeah, it's all in there. Okay, but let me explain a bit about, or do a whiteboard on the identity and access management, because this is really like a hub of access control for AWS. It's pretty important. So let me go here. Identity and access management. Okay, so identity and access management. So IAM, as we lovingly call it, okay, is the core part of access control. So when I'm talking about access control, what do I mean by that? Well, you have resources like servers, networks, and something like databases. Those are resources. Right? Then you have people who's accessing them. Now, it could be a person, like you accessing a server. It could be an application accessing something, something that's doing the accessing. And these are called principals. And so principals access resources. Kind of makes sense, right? But if you don't have anything in between, then you can't really control who has access and who doesn't have access. So normally in access control, you have this, intermediating factor. It's like a filter, right? Like a security filter. And instead of saying filter, let me say security monitor, which will do filtering. Sounds good, right? So then, depending upon what this, what's called a policy, you have somebody that can have allow, some people that are denied, right? Based on that, it says, okay, you're trying to access that resource, and looks like the policy states you are okay. Or you say, I'm looking at the policy and looks like you are not okay, right? That's basically how IAM works, okay? And the way IAM does this is that it allows you to create principals. So in IAM, they allow you to create users, okay? And the application is a special type of a user. So this is, I'll say, with a quotation mark user. It kind of sort of works like a user, okay? But we know that it's an application, okay? Then they have this thing that's really kind of neat called role. I'm going to put a little hat in there. That's called a role. And you know how when people say, well, I'm actually wearing this hat today. I'm a developer, so I'm wearing a developer hat. Or I'm a systems operations today, and I'm wearing a operator's hat, right? So hat represents a specific job description or job roles, right? So that's why they call it the role. But the roles and users and the application the user, you can associate these policies. So that means this role has attached to it, right, a policy that tells this role what this role can do or not do. Same thing with the user. You can assign policy to the user. You can assign policy to the application that determines what the user can do or cannot do, and vice versa. Alrighty? The difference with the role is that it's more temporary, whereas with the users and applications are a little bit more permanent. Okay, but that's not all. So you see that all these controls are controls, as in security measures, are placed on the principal side. Oh, that's not the total picture, because the resources have something to say about that too, right? The server has the right to say, well, you can access me or not access me. S3 service has a right to say, well, you think that you have access to my files, but you don't, because I have this policy that says I deny access to you. Okay. And one thing to remember about AWS is that security is a pretty conservative. That is, when you have somebody that says, well, you can have full access, right, to S3. Let's say full access. Let's say that's the policy that you have as a user. But then if the resource says you have no access, okay, so let's say that's the policy that the resources have. Well, which one wins, right? Because this is obviously a conflict. Well, in AWS, the deny always wins, right? So regardless of how many people give you allows, right? If you have one deny for that action that you want to take, it's denied. Anyway, so IAM is a pretty neat service. And in anything that you do in the AWS, chances are you're going to be using this, okay? Anyway, so let's move on back into the slides. Alrighty, so these are other types of security services. So, check it out. There's just too many to cover in this webinar, but I just want to kind of give you a pointer to it, okay? So the next part is the shared responsibility model. So the shared responsibility is about security. That is, hey, who's responsible for protecting my data? Who's responsible for protecting my server? Who's responsible for protecting, just fill in the blank, okay? So in cloud, we use something called the shared responsibility model. So the shared responsibility kind of works like this. So this picture comes directly from AWS. And if you look at the orange part and the thing that's on top of it, which is the blue part, okay? So the orange part is what AWS provides. They provide you with the physical infrastructure. They provide you with components. Remember the one that we talked about? Compute, storage, networking. That part is AWS's stuff. That's why they are responsible for securing that part. But guess what? If you choose to create a virtual machine from these components, and if you choose to put your data inside that server, that's your call. That means you are responsible for securing your data and who has access to your servers. And that's the split. And that's why it's called a shared responsibility, because you're not just having the orange part, you actually have the blue part and the orange part, and they all have to be equally protected. But AWS is only going to protect the orange part, and you are responsible for protecting the blue part, and that is what's called the shared responsibility model. Now, the one that I'm showing you is just one example of it. Depending upon what services you use, AWS may cover more, you may cover less, okay? But the idea is that, yes, we are both responsible for creating a secure environment. So there you go. That's a quickie on the shared responsibility model. And let's go into the last part, right? Which is the AWS security services and compliance. Now, just as AWS domains, there are tons, right, of security services. So I made a list for you, just a 10 list of the type of security services that AWS has. And as you can see, number one, I think that's really important, identity and access management. Okay, now there's something called guard duty, that is a threat management. AWS Shield is a DDoS protection. Amazon Inspector is a vulnerability scanning service, etc., right? So check it out. They have tons of security services. AWS does really this service, really a good gamut of services that you can use. Now, but it's up to you to use them, okay? But it's available. Now, if we go into the compliance service, compliant to security governance rules and such. Now, the one that I want to kind of highlight to you is the AWS Artifact. AWS Artifact is a place that you go to in AWS service where you find out what compliance certifications does AWS have. right? So if you have to report to your bosses as to, well, AWS is compliant in blank, you want to go to the AWS artifacts and find out, what the status of that compliance is. And there's other ones, and the one that you may want to check it out is something called the AWS Well-Architected Framework, and this is where AWS provides you with a best practices on how to use AWS. And there's actually a one pillar called the security pillar that you may want to check it out. So, Well-Architected Framework, security. Okay, all right. So that was it. All right, so sorry to go a little quick on the last part here, but AWS obviously has plenty of options. You just need to put the parts together and create the service that you are looking for. All right, so that's all I have for you as a content. So now I'm open to your questions.
Thank you, Terumi. That was very informative. I know everyone is looking forward to the Q&A session, so go ahead and start putting your questions into the questions panel. And now I'd like to give the presentation rights over to Rimi, our vendor manager, to introduce our promotions and webinar-related courses.
Thank you so much. And once again, a very warm welcome to everyone who has joined our today's session on AWS Discovery Day that covers the topics on Cloud Practitioner Essentials. Now, I would like to take you all through some of our handpicked resources, which we think will immensely help in accelerating your learning journey on AWS. Starting off with a quick overview of Netcom learning and what sets us apart from the other cloud training leaders. We have very recently been recognized by trainingindustry.com as one of the top 20 IT training companies in the US. Another major driver of our expertise is our 25 plus years of industry presence. We have been able to service over these last 25 years to over 80% of the Fortune 500 companies in both the B2B as well as the B2G space. Now, we just wanted to mention that this session is being recorded. So in case you want to refer back to any of the topics that will be covered during the today's session, we will be sharing the recording with you later on, so you can access the recording through that link. Now, moving to the recommended courses, which we think will best suit your learning journey. What you see right now are some of our upcoming training batches on the top courses. So AWS Cloud Practitioner, which is a fundamental level course, is suited for non-technical folks, whereas the Technical Essentials, which is again a fundamental level course, is suited for technical folks with an experience in the cloud domain. And lastly, developing on AWS is suited for IT workers who want to improve their developing skills using AWS services. Now, we have tried to make the learning as easy as we can for our learners. And regarding the cloud trainings, we have a very interesting offer which we have put in place for all of you that I will be covering in the subsequent slide. Now, we also have a mix of the most relevant resources which will help you get a better understanding of some of our other AWS courses. You can access these resources when we share it with you post the event. So we have put together the events, the ones that we have done in the past. So you can always refer to them as per your learning journey that you have right now. We have also put together a blog that covers an overview of mastering AWS DynamoDB. So in case you have any suggestions for us for the topics that you would like us to cover, do feel free to email them to us. Moving on to the AWS skilling program. So this helps you to develop role-based cloud skills, working side by side our champion level AWS authorized instructors who train cloud professionals on the latest AWS technologies and tools. So now as a part of the program, you and your organization both may also be eligible for free AWS certification exam vouchers and extended lab facilities that extend up to 5 weeks after the completion of the training. Now we are excited to also bring to you the AWS Skill Builder, which is a new learning center with 600 plus free digital courses that is built by the AWS experts. This includes the game-based learning opportunities with CloudQuest and team-based competition with Gen. Its unique set of offerings actually include practical real-world and hands-on lab experiences in a live AWS environment. Now, this is something that we personally love because it showcases the effort that the AWS team takes to make the learning as fun and immersive for the learners. Moving on, another big announcement that we have for our learners today, and something that I had given a hint in the previous, in one of the previous slides, is about our ongoing discount fest, which, as a part of which, you can now choose the AWS training which suits your job role, and you can enroll yourself at almost half of the original price. Please note that this offer is applicable only on the course trainings and not on the course certifications, and the last date to enroll for this is September 30th. Moving on, our free AWS e-learning resources follow a self-paced training model wherein you get the liberty of accessing extensive course-related videos that are delivered by the AWS subject matter experts on the go. So these videos cover the availability on the device of your choice. So you can access them from your laptop, from your tablet, from your phones as well. So please feel free to access these free resources and make the most out of them. Additionally, please feel free to register for a demo to get an idea on what our 2-hour private group trainings on AWS entails. Now, these trainings will be delivered by our AWS authorized instructors with an agenda of understanding the different AWS services and solutions, and will be beneficial for you to devise a roadmap as per your team's current learning needs. The Amazon Web Services Learning Needs Analysis, which we also call as AWS LNA. Now, this is a free self-assessment tool that helps you identify your organization's cloud skills gap. That includes the participating employees to complete an adaptive e-survey that takes no more than 15 minutes, depending on the role. The idea here is to come up with a targeted, cost-effective training and certification plan that's right for your organization and addresses the specific needs of your employees. Moving on, we have the Learning Passport next, which is a flexible team training package specifically designed and customized for the number of learners you have. The Learning Passport is redeemable across our entire portfolio, which covers more than 4,000 official courses valid over 12 months. Now we have an exciting solution for you, which is Netcom Plus Learning Subscription that is there for our enterprise customers. So all you need to do here is to pay one time and you get unlimited access to authorized training from top vendors that includes AWS for a span of 12 months, which is 1 year. Currently, we have 3 packages available. You can get started for free with a silver pack, the one that you see on the first block, which allows you access to more than 300 learning modules. You can upgrade to the gold pack for just $199 and access 400 plus learning modules in addition to the silver pack benefits. And lastly, we highly recommend our most popular offering of all and ideal for our enterprise customers, which is the platinum package that can be unlocked if you have more than 10 learners. Now, in terms of the benefits, it gives you access to 400 plus learning modules and 100 plus virtual instructor led courses across top vendors. So it's a great offering that Netcom team has curated just for our learners. So if you require the details, we will be sharing all the details with you, the links with you. Please take some time to go through them. And if you are interested, we have our team that can answer any of your queries that you might have around the learner subscription. Now, in addition to our custom programs, do feel free to also go through some of our additional resources, which are curated, keeping the learners' needs in demand, and let us know learners' needs in mind, and let us know in the comments if you have any recommendations for us with respect to coming up with more such assets. Now, apart from our virtual sessions, you can also catch the relevant updates related to IT and business training through our social media handles. So please feel free to follow us on all for all the latest updates. Now, lastly, the CEO of Netcom Learning is an avid writer, and you can check out a glimpse of his book, which is a practical, actionable guide on how to boost performance, successfully manage change, and innovate more quickly. Thank you.
Thanks so much for guiding us through that information, Remy. And now we're going to go ahead and jump right into our question and answer session. Is multi-AZ deployment more expensive?
Okay, well, thank you for asking that question. That's a great one. Not too many people have asked me that. So let me answer that question for you. So multi-AZ is a best practice design pattern, okay, that AWS has. So availability zone, even though I wasn't able to cover this in the workshop, each of the regions, that's the locations where AWS has its presence, is composed of multiple zones called availability zones. Now, these availability zones are usually 3 to 20 miles apart, and each availability zone has multiple data centers. So it's a way that AWS actually creates redundancies, right? So if you have, let's say, flooding, let's say on one area, then hopefully, 3 to 20 miles away in another availability zone, these data centers are not suffering from the same flooding incidents, right? So that's the availability zone. So the best practice is that when you're creating, let's say, a network with servers, the best practice is to create 2 servers. That is one in one availability zone and another one in another availability zone, so that if one availability zone were to go down, that you still have your system running because you have another server, a backup server, so to speak, in another availability zone. Okay, so that's what a multi-AZ deployment is. So then you kind of think about it and say, okay, so what are the options? Do you do multi-AZ or not do multi-AZ, right? So if you don't do multi-AZ, then you have your server running in one availability zone. So let's say you're paying for one network, one server, one storage. Okay, but if you do multi-AZ, let's say with 2 availability zones, now you have 2 servers, 2 storage, 2 network. Okay, so what do you think the answer is? Right, so the multi-deployment is more expensive, yes. It's doubly expensive, not exactly double, but it's close to being double. But with that cost, you are buying comfort in knowing that you have high availability. So you have to realize that security is not free. Okay, security is not free, and if you want security, you do have to spend more money, and it's up to you to decide if that increased expense is well worth the money. I hope that answers your question.
Is direct connection highly available by default?
Okay, so thank you for that. So Direct Connect is a special way that you can connect to AWS services, especially for companies with data centers or have some special need to access AWS in a more secure and more reliable fashion. So how do we access AWS in general? Well, we access it using the internet, right? But internet has issues. But sometimes internet is fast, sometimes internet is slow. You worry about security issues in the internet, kind of name a few, right? So maybe companies may say, okay, to access these generic AWS services, internet may be okay. Maybe we can even use VPNs over the internet, but can we do something better? Do we have more options? And one of the options is to use this service called the Direct Connect. Now, Direct Connect does not use the internet to access AWS services. They use fiber connections, dedicated fiber connections, and users, customers will connect to a intermediate location called Direct Connect buildings or the services. Then from the Direct Connect location, it has direct connection to AWS. So it's like a 2-step process. You connect into the Direct Connect, and then the Direct Connect location it's called co-location facility. But then the co-location facility will connect into AWS. So from end to end, it is a private network, fiber, very fast. Okay. So that's Direct Connect. So the question then is, hey, is Direct Connect highly available by default? So availability is one pillar of security, right? Remember, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Okay. Now, it's actually, let me kind of preface by saying maybe yes or maybe no. Okay. So because if you look at one way and say, well, it's not an internet, it's a fiber connection. So then you say that is more highly available than the internet. Okay. Remember, availability means you can access the systems, even though there may be some fault conditions. So with the internet, it may not be as reliable as direct connect, right? But what happens if a let's say electrical work comes and cuts the fiber by mistake? Well, okay, so now you don't have availability, right? Okay, so if there's damage to that network, then you don't have any connection. So whenever you use direct connect, the best practice is to always have a backup. Maybe you have a second physical direct connect connections, or you have a VPN which goes through the internet, so that if your direct connect goes down for some odd reason, that you are still able to access AWS by using the internet method. So in this way, there is no backup, right? It's not available. The high availability in this sense is not available by default. That is, it's not built to withstand somebody damaging the fiber connection. Okay, so from that perspective, the answer is no. All right, so I hope you understand the nuance of how I answer that question. So in one way, yes, it is more reliable, hopefully, than the internet, so it will be highly available by default because it's not the internet. But no, because it's not going to give you a redundancy in direct connect by default. You would have to purchase additional direct connect connections to create a more redundancy in the connection, or by additional direct connect, or also have a VPN as a backup.
How can we back up the EC2 machine?
Okay, great. So thank you for asking that, because it's really important, right, to be able to disaster recovery backup, or any type of a backup that you want to do, right? So there are several ways that you can actually back up your EC2 machine. So the very quick way is that you have to understand that the EC2 is a virtual machine, right? So if you have a virtual machine, how do you usually back up a virtual machine? Well, you do something called a snapshot. So there are facilities to take a snapshot of your EC2 machine, whereas what the snapshot will do is it will make a copy of the hard disks that are attached to, right, or the block storage that is attached to the EC2. So that would be the disk that has your operating system in it, and perhaps the disk that has your data in it. So if you take a snapshot, there you go, you have a backup. Okay, but when you take a snapshot, it's always a full backup, right? And sometimes maybe that's not what you're looking for. Maybe what you're looking for is a incremental backup. So, maybe you just want something that, in addition to the backup you did earlier, all the changes that you made, right? You just want to back up those small incremental changes, okay? Or something called incremental backup, and the differential backup. So there are different types of backup strategies, but you can't do that with a snapshot per se, right? Snapshot's always about getting the whole thing right now. Okay, so there is a backup service, right? AWS Backup that you can use to back up your EC2. So those are a couple of options that you have in backing up your EC2 machine.
Which is a better option for container orchestration, EKS or ECS?
Okay, well, interesting question, right? Because in the webinar, I didn't really talk about containers. I kind of sort of mentioned that, yeah, containers are there, but I didn't really talk about them. So for those of you that don't really, know what containers are, so if you're familiar with something called Docker, so Docker is a company that offers a service called the Docker Containerization Engine, which actually creates a more lightweight version of a virtual machine, right? So if you have a virtual machine, most likely you could probably implement that solution lighter weight, less resources by using this technology called containers. But because it's lighter, people have a tendency to create a whole bunch of them, and containers really go out of control very quickly. So you have to be on top of it to manage how many containers you have, where are they running, are they healthy, all that stuff, right? So EKS and ECS. So EKS, Elastic Kubernetes Service, ECS, Elastic Container Service, they're both container orchestration service, right? So they both help you to manage your containers in AWS, okay? So which one do you choose? Well, ECS is a native service to AWS. So it doesn't exist anywhere else other than AWS. It's a pretty straightforward way to use, and it'll do its job by managing your containers. Okay, so if you don't have any preference, and if you are a strictly an AWS user, then ECS probably is a good option for you. But people have been using containers way before, chances are, before they move into the cloud, right? Maybe they were using containers on premises. In that case, how did they do orchestration? Well, more likely, they were probably using this orchestration service called Kubernetes. Now, Kubernetes was originally developed by Google, later made into open source container orchestration service. Okay, so a lot of enterprises are using Kubernetes, and Kubernetes you can use on AWS or any other cloud vendor. So it's a vendor neutral service that allow you to manage containers. So Elastic Kubernetes Service is an implementation of that Kubernetes inside AWS, right? So which one do you choose? Are you already using Kubernetes? If you're already using Kubernetes, I think it just makes a common sense that you use Elastic Kubernetes Service, because there are always learning curve to learning how to use Kubernetes and how to use ECS. So if you already have the expertise and the investments in using EKS, I think it's just pretty straightforward way use EKS instead of ECS. And if you're also thinking about using multi-cloud, that is not just AWS, but other cloud services at the same time, then Kubernetes, once again, is going to be a good option because you can use Kubernetes on these other cloud vendors as well as in AWS. So one reason why you would not use Kubernetes is because, hey, you're strictly AWS and you have no preference. But another reason why you may want to think about ECS is that EKS is pretty complex. It's pretty deep, okay? There's so many options. It does have a learning curve, and you do have to put in the time to invest in training people how to use EKS, okay? So those would be some reasons that you may want to apply when you're choosing EKS or ECS. I hope that works for you.
Once again, I want to remind you that as you leave this session today, you will be presented with a short survey. We would like to request for you to help us by taking a quick moment to participate in that survey. Your feedback really helps us understand your learning experience as we are constantly looking at how we can improve our future sessions. The survey answers are measured on a scale of 1 to 5, 5 representing outstanding and 1 representing poor. We want to thank all of you for joining us today, and if you do come up with any additional questions, feel free to send them to webinar@netcomlearning.com at any time. We hope that you found today's webinar informative, and we look forward to seeing you back here with us soon. Feel free to tell your friends and colleagues about our webinars and other courses. Have a great day, everyone.